Michael Shellenberger is with us, the author of San Fransicko. No, San Fransicko, sorry. It's a great book. Stu's just have you finished it yet?
Yeah. It's really good.
Michael, welcome to the program. How are you, sir?
I'm great. Thanks for having me, Glenn.
You
Glad
bet.
to be back.
So this is a good thing that's happening from your point of view, I would imagine. San Francisco is starting to come to their senses.
I mean, we're thrilled. I mean, what can I say? I mean, it's incredible to see the San Francisco mayor got up. She said in very blunt terms that things had to change. She explicitly called for tough love. She used those words, tough love. And then she used an expletive, which I won't use.
Yeah, I know.
She said BS. She said, we're not going to tolerate this BS anymore. And it was a very strong speech. I mean, look, there's a lot of reasons to be skeptical. I've read 30 years of proposals coming out of the San Francisco government promising to do this. But it's clear she staked her political future on what she does next. And it's just given a lot of momentum to the critics of this kind of radical, progressive left nonsense, defund the police, that demoralized and demonized police, and that resulted in this crime surge we're seeing. We also saw the former mayor of Philadelphia come out and criticize the left-wing DA for basically dismissing the fact that we're in a crime wave at all. I mean, much of the left has been in denial that we're in the midst of record homicide levels in many cities, incredible amounts of crime going on, all of it created by progressive policies, all of it allowed by progressive policies. So to see this backlash now coming, including from the heart of progressivism, is really quite inspiring.
So I want to play something from Nancy Pelosi because it goes to the mayor of San Francisco. And here's what she said yesterday. Nancy Pelosi.
What it is, it's absolutely outrageous. Obviously, it cannot continue. But the fact is that there is an attitude of lawlessness in our country that springs from I don't know where. Maybe you do.
Yes, I do.
And we cannot have that lawlessness.
So here's the thing. She's claiming she doesn't know what's caused this lawlessness. It has been her and people like her who have allowed people to set fire to our cities. And it's the progressive policies. Now, this particular mayor, it was, I think, in June that she said, I'm all in. We're cutting the budgets. We're doing all kinds of different things. How has she changed? What happened to her that has given her this pivot point?
Well, Glenn, there's this famous old slogan from, I think, the 70s, which is liberals become conservatives when they're mugged by reality. And I think that's just what's happened here. I mean, yeah, it's striking. You got to remember, San Francisco and Mayor Breed was one of the first progressive mayors to call for defunding the police. She announced $120 million in cuts to the budgets of both the San Francisco Police and Sheriff's Department just last year. I mean, we've seen the results on the ground. I mean, things are absolutely chaotic. It's hard to describe if you're not here, but we have, the older and worsening problem of street addiction, open-air drug scenes, open-air drug markets with violence. There's homicides have obviously increased all around the country, certainly in the Bay Area, particularly in Oakland, but also in San Francisco. And then we've seen this just greater audacity and brazenness of this really looting, these smash-and-grab robberies organized on Snapchat, thieves going into luxury department stores, stealing designer handbags, and really giving lie to the claim by AOC and others on the progressive left who claimed that these are just poor people stealing bread to survive. I mean, these are folks that are stealing luxury handbags for money. So
and then selling them openly on the street and not being hassled, right?
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. I mean, when you and I talked before, this all boils down to a victim ideology, the idea that you can divide the world and people in the world into victims and oppressors, and that to the victims, everything should be given and nothing required. And that means that they basically, the DA has stopped enforcing many laws against people that they deem to be victims, whether they're drug addicts, mentally ill people, people breaking laws, and that's what's given basically permission to all of this increased criminal activity.
So do you think that this is another shell game? I mean, look, there are Marxists that want a completely different system. I think there are people that call themselves progressives that don't really understand what the progressive movement really kind of turned into. But they do agree with the Bill of Rights. They do agree with law and order, and they believe in a lot of the same things I do. Which category is she in, do you think? Is this just another Marxist progressive that is now just going to try to hang on to power? Or do you think real changes are open or on the table here?
I mean, you're asking exactly the right question, which is there's a lot of progressive people that kind of go back and forth with one of two views. I mean, one view is, I would call it a more liberal view, which you believe that, hey, we all have the same police. We should all be under the same laws. This is the foundation of our Constitution. It's the foundation of our civilization, which is equal rights under the law. There's another view which says, no, we have to have this radical change. We need to get rid of the police. We need to have some completely different group of people in that role. The laws should be enforced differently depending on your identity or your experience. And, you can see the difference. It's like there's one set of people want to reform the police who doesn't want that, who doesn't want to make the police better. There's another group that want to just get rid of them. And I think that when you see heavily emotional moments like last year, the George Floyd video, nobody could watch that and not be horrified by it. Nobody could watch that and not want to see police reform.
Correct.
But that, in those emotional environments, the radical left takes advantage of people's genuine sympathies and genuine empathies, particularly liberals. They manipulate them to suggest that we should somehow abolish the police or defund the police. In fact, the research shows very clearly that if you want to reduce police violence, you actually have to fund the police. You actually need more police officers so that they have the time to get the training that they need.
Michael, in your book, you had, I'm going to try to remember the anecdote, but you talked to someone, and you did a bunch of interviews for this book, and I thought it was really illustrative of what the issue is here. And it was about someone, a theoretical situation where a frat boy, a hammered, drunk frat boy comes out in front of somebody's house and goes to the bathroom on the sidewalk versus the actual problems that are going on in San Francisco, really, with homeless people and others doing that same thing. And it seems like they're advocating for completely different treatments of these people, as if one is really bad and one isn't.
Yeah, you got it. I mean, you're referring to this conversation where I confront a lead attorney with the ACLU, and I say, so you're saying that you shouldn't enforce laws against, say, public defecation if the person that's doing it is mentally ill or addicted to hard drugs? And she said, well, you have to make a judgment. I mean, if it's a frat guy urinating in my driveway, then he should be arrested. But if it's somebody with mental illness, you should send out a social worker. And, first of all, that's just not actually that's not the best way to deal with the problem. I talk about how Europe deals with it, very liberal Europe. You arrest people for committing crimes, and yes, at the jailhouse, in front of the judge with a psychiatrist, they are evaluated for whether or not they have a mental illness or a drug addiction, and often the alternative is rehab or psychiatric care if they're mentally ill.
But we don't do that. And
we stopped doing that,
yeah.
Exactly. And
I think we've made it worse. We've then given them free homes and, a free apartment with absolutely no responsibilities. No responsibilities. You don't have to become clean and sober. You can just keep doing what you're doing, but now you're inside.
You got it. And in San Fransicko, I describe how giving cash, giving housing to people with serious mental illness and addiction with no accountability results in worsening of their disease and often death. And so, but at bottom, it's this idea that somehow the law should be enforced differently, or that people should not be arrested for certain crimes, when in fact it's actually arresting people for those crimes that often gets them the help that they need, while of course also protecting public spaces, public dignity, and cities themselves. So it's really they've created the worst of both worlds. They've both created increased human suffering and the destruction of our greatest cities.
So out of those two categories of people, the ones who just want radical change and those who just are seeing problems and want to fix things, but they're within parameters, where is this? Do you feel the movement of the first category? Do you feel like that is starting to change and they are starting to say, look, I think there's a difference between a Democrat and you guys?
Yeah, I think for sure. I mean, so Breed, the thing that's been happening is that the progressives came to power in San Francisco. And Breed, even though she's mayor, she's a weak mayor, not due to any fault of her own, but because the system gives her very little power. She's on this broader board of supervisors that's controlled by progressives. Breed is sort of the last generation of the moderates, and she's been outgunned really for years by the progressives. So I think what we're seeing is moderates coming back. You sort of ask, what will the future bring? This is a really dynamic moment. It's a really chaotic moment. So truly, we don't know. It depends on what all of us do. I mean, we've organized parents of kids killed by fentanyl, parents of kids addicted to hard drugs, including fentanyl in the streets, as well as recovering addicts. We've created a coalition called the California Peace Coalition. We're actually scaling up nationwide because there's been so much demand for this nationally. We've put a lot of pressure on these guys privately, publicly. We've held protests of drug dealers in L.A. and in San Francisco. And I tell you, it's had an impact. I mean, the response from people to our protests was basically what took you so long.
Yeah.
And we were like, look, we were the first ones protesting drug dealers, but I think it had an impact. We've also seen the communities most affected by open-air drug dealing, which, of course, are poor communities, mostly minority communities. They've now started having marches and protests. And what's so interesting, Glenn, is that that's exactly what worked in other parts of the world, including the Netherlands, including Europe, is that it took the communities, the people themselves from those neighborhoods, getting organized, demanding change. That's what's led the mayor to take the action she did. The crime obviously wasn't enough. It really took this kind of outrage, this action by the people, by the parents, by those communities to get this change of heart by the mayor.
Yeah, I read a story in the New York Post today that said that it was the people from the community. And she was forced to look at it and would attend and would actually talk to people. And she was like, you know what? We're wrong on this. We got to move towards the people. And the people usually have the answer. It's just whether or not the politician is humble enough to listen to the people. Michael, thank you so much for everything you do. And have a great holiday season.
Thanks so much for having me back on, Glenn. You too. Happy holidays.
You bet. Michael Shellenberger, he is the author of San Fransicko. And the founder and president of Environmental Progress. All of the things that you would think I really don't like, but I find this guy very, very reasonable. And, he's the author of Apocalypse Never, which is...
You got to have that book, too.
You have to have that.
Both of them are really, really great.
Yeah.
Apocalypse Never has so many things you'll go back to over and over and over again when you're debating the environment with your friends.
Yeah, and he was the guy who Time Magazine said is the hero of the environment. Won the Green Book of the Year in 2008. Started doing more and more research, and he was like, "This is not what they're saying is not true. Yes, the environment is important and in trouble, but it's not going to kill us all. It's not like what they're saying, and I don't know if any of these solutions that they are saying are the good, right solutions. The guy is an honest broker of information, and we have far too few of those, especially on those who came from the progressive left. Michael Shellenberger is his name.